when you're playing poker, you know that bad session is coming at
Yeah.
some point.
Our brains are not equipped to deal with that much variance, full stop. And the variance that can happen in poker can be extreme. If they have a really bad losing session, it often isn't actually so much related to the money. Now, that sounds kind of strange, right?
Right. Yeah.
But
We're back with another podcast for you guys, just me and Tom this time around. And we're going to talk about one of the biggest Achilles heels in poker. Is that a thing,
okay,
Tom?
yeah,
Is that
that's a thing.
okay?
Yeah. I mean, it depends
Yeah,
what you're going to say, but yeah, that
yeah,
works.
yeah. It's one of those one of those things as a poker player, like we all deal with it. And a lot of us kind of stay silent about it and don't want to share our struggles with other people, because maybe we feel like maybe we look too weak, or some of us are like, I don't care, I'm going to share my struggles. We're talking about emotions and poker, like negative emotions in poker. And we're going to be talking about in this video, like, why does it hit us so hard emotionally? Like, even when we make the right decisions, we're going to get into stuff like that. What are some practical ways to recover, mentally when you're in the midst of like just feeling these a whiplash of emotions like you would at the poker tables. We're also going to talk about, have we ever reached the point of wanting to quit and just give up at the poker tables, or maybe with poker in general. And I think a lot of people can relate to this kind of topic because poker can be mentally challenging at times. And at times it could be like you're on top of the world, you know what I mean? And everything's going
Yeah.
fantastic. I mean,
Yeah.
we're not going to get too far into that, into this. Maybe we might touch on it a little bit later, like when poker's going well and you're just like, you literally feel like Superman at the tables and nothing can stop you. But yeah, we're gonna get into this topic of like how to not feel terrible playing poker. So Tom, when I say that, before we get into any like specific questions, we're gonna get into a few specific questions. When I say that, like what's like what's your intuition say? Like what's the first thing that kind of comes to mind of like how do you just not feel terrible at the poker tables? Like what are some things you can do or
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. So, I mean, it's interesting as well. Like, I think if we had the content putting out for, how do I stop myself feeling too good at the poker tables? I don't think that would be so popular. Like, people when they're on a good run and they're feeling great, typically you're not searching for like, how do I not feel this way, right? But I think it's something that comes with the territory. I don't think there would be a poker player out there who hasn't at some point felt frustrated with the game, or felt anxious about the future, or felt, you know, angry or whatever. And I think it's something where it's important to acknowledge that these are feelings that everybody's going to experience when they play poker. It's such a, I think Peter Clark. What do you remember
yeah.
the title of his
Yeah,
book,
yeah,
Jack?
Peter Clark. I forgot the name of the book though.
He had this concept, I think, which is called like Alien World, right?
Mm.
So apologies, Peter, if he ever sees this. I'm probably going to butcher his, but it's a really nice analogy I think he used. The world that poker sits in is completely alien, if you like, to our kind of evolutionary chimp brains that we see, or we want to like sort of organize patterns, and we want to see things as quite black and white. And I'd like to see a berry's either poisonous or it's wonderful, and I eat lots. And
Hmm.
if I get sick from eating a berry, then like I'm not going to eat that berry anymore. And what poker is like, well, here's a berry bush, and 1 out of 20 maybe might be poisonous, but might
Hmm.
be really good as well. Kind of, it's like our brains are not equipped to deal with that much variance, full stop. And the variance that can happen in poker can be extreme. The problem is, I think, is the big challenge, is that the variance can also be quite variable. So I think sometimes it's very easy for people to almost delude themselves a little bit, and think that I'm just running really badly, and then that comes with its own territory. So there's a whole spectrum, if you like, of things that we can apply mental game towards. Maybe we'll start with the kind of fundamentals, which is like, why does it hurt so much to lose at poker, especially initially, right? And I think that's something that we can kind of unpack a little bit in detail. Maybe I'll let you take over a bit, Jack, just in terms of like trying to cover that core fundamental.
Yeah, we'll get to a question very specific to that right in a
Okay.
second here. But I think what you're getting at with what you're saying is like it's the uncertainty of it that kind of drives people mad a little bit, right? Like when you're saying 1 out of 20 is like a poisonous thing. So let's just say like once in a while you're gonna have you like when you're playing poker, you know that bad session is coming at
Yeah.
some point. You're gonna have that 1 out of 20 poisonous, whatever. It might be more frequent than 1 out of 20. Depends what stakes you're
Yeah.
playing, how hard the games are, or whatever. But eventually, it's inevitable. I always have trouble saying that word. Inevitable. It's inevitable that you're gonna get to a point where you're going to have a bad session. It's just going to go terribly wrong. You're not going to feel good. And like even just the anticipation of that happening is already kind of like a lot, right? So, all right, let's jump straight into our questions for today. We got a few
Okay,
questions we want to go over. I'll just ask them to you. You can hit on them and I'll hit on them afterwards and kind of touch
perfect.
on what you're saying. So the first thing is exactly what we were just talking about. The first part of the question is why does poker hit us so hard emotionally, even when we make the right decision? So let's just say like you're playing perfect, like everything's there. You can even like tell yourself like I played so good in this session, but let's just say it's a session where money wise, the worst session of your life. Okay, so just think about that. Like whatever's the worst session you've ever had in your life, money wise. Let's say that session like happens tomorrow, and even though you can look back and be like, I made the best decisions. Like, why does it hurt so bad? Right, let's just go even one step even beyond that and say like even like losing this money, like you're not going to go homeless, like you're going to be fine. It sucks, okay, it sucks, but you're going to be fine. Like you're not going to go homeless or whatever, like you're still have food to eat. Like why would you say like this just hurts so badly, like even though you're making the right decisions and stuff like that?
Yeah, so I think we can kind of do a few thought experiments. Obviously, both me and Jack have worked with loads of different guys, and so like I can talk about without going into obviously any specifics with people, but the general trends that emerge from a lot of the guys I work with. If they have a really bad losing session, it often isn't actually so much related to the money. Now that sounds kind of strange, right?
Yeah.
But if we do a little thought experiment, let's say someone loses $10,000, right, and it was their worst ever session, and they feel pretty shitty about it. But if in Jack's scenario, it's like, well, it's not going to make you homeless. You know, long term, you're going to be a winning poker player. Why would that hurt so much? And I think it's kind of interesting because let's say, for example, someone buys a new car, and as soon as they drive their new car out of the parking lot, the brand new
Yeah.
garage, they've lost $10,000 in a weird sort of way,
Sure.
right? Because now it's not a
Happens,
new
yeah.
car anymore. But that losing that money doesn't hurt so much, right? And so I
Mhm.
think just that little thought experiment alone, and maybe there's an overlap there, by the way, for some like wealthy poker players who, play high enough stakes where like losing $10,000 could be like a normal session, would also
Sure.
be the touch maybe to buy a brand new car or whatever, and like kind of lose that amount of money in terms of the net worth as well. And one is often associated with really strong emotional negative feelings, and one's actually associated with kind of cool emotional feelings, right? Or another example, like you spend $10,000 to go on an amazing holiday or something,
Mm.
and again, like you've lost $10,000, but you get this experience, etc., and like typically you feel quite good about yourself. And so I think just that little experiment alone, for a lot of people, and I think a lot of these things we have to be quite general about because it's not for everybody, but it at least demonstrates that there is something more to it than just the money that's being lost. And where I think that often inevitably leads to is it's the kind of emotional hit that will come with it. And it can be a couple of different things happening there. One of the things, at least, that I can identify with, if I was to go on a sustained losing period, would be I would be worried about the future of my poker or
Sure.
poker in general, right? And I would have fears about, is this sustainable? And that's quite a rational, logical thing to do, right? I mean, if I was to
Sure.
play, let's say if I was losing low stakes spin and goes, right, and that's my bread and butter, like I should be really good at spin and goes, and I can't even win at the low stakes or something. I'm like, oh, okay, like this is a problem. Not just I would arrogantly think, not just for me, but like for poker in general. I'm like, oh, now what do I do? And that's actually a very rational thing, by the way, to kind of then be anxious about that because it's the same if we go back to the kind of the chimp brain. It's like if suddenly there's a drought and all my crops are failing. It's like, of course, I'm going to be anxious about that. The emotion is there to prompt me to take action to try and change the situation. And in that aspect, at least, it's very, very relevant. Where I think often there can be that sort of disconnect between the kind of logical, emotional conclusion and the situation that's happening is when it doesn't reflect that. So if you're playing high stakes, you're going to naturally go on these big losing swings and they don't reflect the end of your career and they don't reflect the end of poker. But sometimes, again, as we talked about, like maybe our brains are not designed to understand this volatility that we experience on a day-to-day basis as poker pros. It feels that way nonetheless, right? It
Right.
feels like, oh, maybe I've forgotten how to play poker. Maybe actually I've just been running good for years, etc., etc. And often that is associated, I think, with lots of frustration. Anger is very common. I think a lot of people get incredibly frustrated at like opponents on the tables. And to give another silly example, obviously we work a lot with spin and go players. I know a lot of spin and go players who get incredibly frustrated at individual opponents they play. So if Jack, let's do a little thought experiment here. You obviously have a heads up background, so you'll kind of
Sure.
identify this quite well. Let's say back in the day, you had 100 different heads up regs that you played with frequently. Okay.
Sure.
Now it stands to reason that against one of those regs, you're going to be in the bottom 1% because there's 100 of them, right? In terms of expected outcomes. And it stands to reason that one of them will be in the top 1% because, again, there's 100 guys, approximately one top one, bottom one. What are the chances? Let's say you had a 3% ROI, 2% ROI. I'm not sure, by the way. Let's be generous, right? 2% ROI against these guys. What are the chances over, let's say, a 5,000 game sample that like bottom 1% would actually end up winning if you're 2% EV ROI? If that makes sense for my question.
What are the chances a bottom 1% reg beats me? Is that what you're saying?
The reg that you have your bottom 1% run against, what are the
Right.
chances that you're beating them over a limited sample?
I don't know the answer to that.
But the chances are basically almost zero, right? It's like, unless your win rate was like astronomical and the volume you play against these guys was astronomical, and in spin and goes, by the way, both of those things are not true. It is impossible for you over a year to have regs that you're not getting crushed by. And everybody often completely focuses on these guys and treats them with such anger and disdain and frustration and trying to find evidence that these guys are not any good, etc., etc. But very frequently, you don't see the same rigor applied to the top 1%, right? The guys that you're absolutely sun running, you just go, well, I'm just a really good poker player, you know? It's like, I'm just really good. They clearly shouldn't be playing me, etc., etc. And so I think it's quite a nice thing to remember for a lot of players is you will have your nemesis out there at the poker tables, but you are someone else's nemesis. And I think a lot of people forget that, and they just go, "Well, I'm not. I'm just playing my best. Who cares?" And it's really interesting. Often, I think again how we differentiate between those two sorts of things. Now, did I do a very good job answering that question? What was I've forgotten the initial question.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. The question, yeah, I think you did a really good job answering it. The original question was, why does poker hit us so hard emotionally, even when we make the right decision? So it's like you're getting at like there's a couple things. There's a few things actually you touched on there. One of them is you kind of have to like zoom out and take perspective on the situation and be like a lot of this is variance and you have to logically kind of understand that. The other thing you touched on is you have to understand that there's like a personal aspect to poker where it's like it feels like someone's out to get you, like if someone's beating you, it feels like there's a personal vendetta and you're just like this guy took my money and I need to make it back. And it's kind of being aware of that. And once you kind of wrap
Yeah,
your head around being aware of that and the fact that you are someone else's nemesis, just the way you hate this guy, somebody else is
yeah,
behind you, probably hating on
yeah,
you, then you can kind of be like, this cycle or this loop doesn't make any sense. And the other thing you touched on earlier on was when you're losing in poker, the reason why I feel so bad, it becomes like a self-esteem issue as well, right? You start to question yourself. You're just like, am I even that good? Like if I'm that good, like why am I on this like massive downswing? Like why can't I beat the game anymore? And it's like you may not be consciously saying those words, but your subconscious mind is feeling the pain of like, what if I am an imposter? What if
yeah,
I'm not as good as I thought I was? What if all this work I've put in is for nothing and like all of a sudden now the games are not beatable and now I got to quit the game? Like Jared Tendler talks a lot about this in the Mental Game of Poker books and stuff like that. And he discusses like the downswings are not like the losing sessions, the downswings are not only like the money. The money is a part of it, but it's so much more than that. It's like, well, what if I can't play poker for a living? So now I got to go get a real job. Like, what am I going to tell my parents? Like, all these people that told me I would fail, like, all these
yeah, yeah, yeah,
things come up in the subconscious mind and it kind of takes over your soul, I want to say, like in that
yeah.
moment. And you're just like, like it's one of those feelings, right? So all that stuff, I think you answered really, really well.